Hello, my name is Isabel Pinto. I'm from the University of Porto and from CMAR, Center for Marine and Environmental Research. And I'm a biologist, so I'm a natural scientist. And but I also very involved in this science policy interfaces. I'm working very closely, very actively with IPES. And so I was really very interested in this, in all the presentations, but in this last presentation. But I think we heard a lot about models and how to really support decision making under uncertainty. But well, at least as a scientist, I still believe that we need data and that we should continue actually to look for data and increase our knowledge. And so the first question I had for our panel was really, you know, for the different sectors that you kind of represent and you presented here, what is the key data and knowledge that you need to really, in a way, decrease in uncertainty a little, even for a little bit, so this mitigate this uncertainty? What will be this key knowledge? And also related to this, how do you see the role of the scientific community? Of course, a lot of us here are scientists, but we already heard here that to solve these problems that we're discussing here, the scientific community is just one player. We really need to bring together all the other players. But also we have to be aware that we are here in the framework of this All Atlantic Ocean Research Forum and research agenda. And we would like to have recommendations for a research agenda for the next All Atlantic Ocean Research Agenda that is going to be discussed and hopefully supported later this year in Washington. So I would like to hear, and not to follow the order, we could start maybe with Mary that talk about this mesopelagic environment and this management, and first, what kind of data and knowledge do we really need to get? What is critical or more important, and also how you see the role of yourself, also the scientific community. Well,
thank you very much, Isabel, and I enjoyed all of the presentations very much, and I'm excited to see this discussion emerging about uncertainty and also the way things are moving away from it. And also, this is also really exciting to see this discussion unfold like this. My early career as a scientist was mostly developing predictive models or trying to do it, and I found many, experienced many times where it was, very frustrating. Of course, there's so many things that we cannot predict. And so I think it's wonderful to have a discussion now about how we, what alternatives there are to decision making that don't rely on those kinds of approaches, because I think that's very important for us to move in that kind of direction. And also there's a lot that because prediction, we can't predict what's going to happen next. But there are some things that we do know will happen. We're going to have more stakeholders. We're going to have more unprecedented events as we go forward in the Anthropocene, and that means there's going to be more uncertainties to come. And so having more approaches that we can work with is really, really important. I think coming also from the background that I have as a natural scientist, the thing that I think that we need more of is more. I mean, we're seeing more and more of this where we have better collaboration across the disciplines. But the more that I work in a system like the mesopelagic, or looking in coastal areas with marine spatial planning, is that I want to know more about what the other disciplines have to bring, or what they can bring into the questions that I'm trying to answer, those that maybe are new to me. And so moving into looking at the things that are driving decisions, that are driving governance decisions, whether or not advice is going to be taken. That's also what are our what will change, how will perceptions in society change the future trajectories that we have. And so I think that's really important. And also, I mean, I mentioned all of those. I've listed many places where in the mesopelagic, we where things are very sensitive, where our models so far show there's a lot of sensitivity to uncertainty. Things like the biomass, estimates of the biomass, things like the fish meal prices, and so on. Things like the governance approaches that may be taken. And so those are things I'm thinking about. Thank you.
Well, thank you. But I think you mentioned that somehow there's think that about 1 million undescribed species just in this environment. So you don't think that's important for our decision, not the name of the species, but to know what's there. And you talk about biomass, but of course, biomass.
I think absolutely, but I mean, biodiversity, understanding what's there, of course, that's essential. I mean, there are so many that we. That's a big gap in our knowledge, and also how does how does the biodiversity interact with within the system? What is its role in climate? How vulnerable is it? There's so much that I mean it's hard to pick any part of the mesopelagic that I wouldn't want to know more about. And biodiversity is, of course, it's one of the big things too. And so we're just beginning to understand things. And so, and of course, also I should also add, among those things that the greatest uncertainties that we've identified so far, that's because we're just at the beginning. That's because those are the ones that we've been able to identify so far. And biodiversity, we haven't had enough information yet, and pulled those into the models that we've developed yet, because we're just at the beginning, so we're not there yet. And so we're focusing mostly on these the biomass and harvest questions so far, but it's just a beginning of a journey.
Okay, thank you. But I think this is what we should really identify here. Of course, we know that we'll have in 10 years, we still have a lot of uncertainty, but I mean, we could really try to work on having a little more knowledge and of course, knowledge on many different issues. But I think we could here try to identify what are the key issues that we should work on. I mean, as a scientific community also. Maybe I would ask this also to Rodrigo Carvalho for marine spatial planning. I mean, this is also very complex exercise, but of course I know it does not only needs a lot of things, not only data and knowledge, but of course you also need data and knowledge. Hopefully you use that to do this exercise. So what kind is what you all actually talked about, data is not accessible, that you'll try to work now to make this data that already exists accessible. So I would like to for you to really mention a bit more, specify what kind of knowledge and data you would need, and also how you see the role of the scientific community.
Before Rodrigo goes into this, we've got two questions here, one from Stephen Popper and one from Rodrigo, actually, with respect to Mary's response. Could we tackle those?
I was just raising my hand to speak. I don't need to go out of turn. I'd be happy to hear from Rodrigo.
No, yeah, I would like
Point
to
taken.
take 2 or 3, and then, but then any panelist, of course, is free to intervene, and I'll go to those that have hand up. But maybe now, Rodrigo, can you respond, and then I'll go to.
It's perfect, and thanks so much, Isabel, for the question. Actually, now we are gathering this data, this marine data, to make available in this infrastructure that we have. And actually the Blue Amazon, with this 5.7 million square kilometers, we have a great potential, especially in some activities like oil and gas. We have oil and gas in very deep waters, like for 4,000 meters, we can collect oil and gas. And the wind farms is getting bigger and bigger here in Brazil, and also the deep mining. So we are very worried about this, the areas we're going to allocate these activities. So some information that are very important for us are related to the fishing stocks, especially far from the coast. We have very good information close to the coast, but as soon as we go far from, so we start to have a lack of data. And in terms of main inconsistent location, that would be very important for us. And the Blue Amazon productivity, actually it would be very good, biomass and all this stuff. So we could, if I had this information, we could have better decisions to plan when are going to have these areas for these big investments, like oil and gas, deep mining, and also the offshore wind farms. That's basically the main information that will be very important for us. Basically, information far from the coast. Close to the coast, we have enough data. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, when you say basic information, what kind of information? Basic. What do you mean basic? This is, you know, geological, biological.
Yes, geological, geophysical. For example, bathymetry is very important. The currents, even the waves, the regime of waves, depending on activities, you have to have this kind of information. The wind regime, the tide currents, depending on the area, we have different demands for this information. And we have some buoys monitoring these. We have some data. Our islands also have meteorological collecting data, but they are very far from each other. So in these areas between the coast and these islands or the buoys, we have a lack of information. That's what we are looking for. And as I told you, if you have a hydrographic ship fully dedicated, that would take us more than 100 years just to collect the data. If you process the data and this data change to information that we can use, we're talking about more than 300 years. So we don't have time, and so we need to work with all information that we have and with all information that we can gather with your other partners.
Okay, thank you. And
Okay,
now, Stephen, you can, I don't know if you were going to answer the question or pose another question. You're muted, you're muted.
Yeah, 2.5 years of plague, and I still forget about the mute button.
All of us.
Yeah. No, I very much wanted to speak to the question, Isabel. So I come to this as a methodologist and as an economist. So, data are good, but data are also costly. And so it's a question of, which data do you want? And this, again, causes me to, to begin at the end. What am I trying to do with the data? What is it trying to inform? If the data are to inform, to better enhance our understanding of the twilight zone in the ocean, and the nature and forms of its biomass and so on and so forth, then anything that we can get our hands on is useful. So what data do we need? We need it all. We need the biological data. We need the chemical, physical data, and so on. If there is some kind of a decision that we're trying to inform, now it becomes a lot trickier question. where are we going to put the marginal dollar to? What data do we really need? And that's a question that, I'm going to sound like a broken record. You can actually begin to understand with the DMDU methodologies. So for example, let's say there is something, an area in which there is tremendous controversy, and we really lack data about the order of magnitude differences in guesses about what the total biomass is in the twilight zone. We can do something very simple, which is, introduce a factor that varies between 0 and 1. That's either a scalar that multiplies some equation, or is a proxy for a probability that we currently can't estimate. And we can see what difference does it make. If you can go through the entire range of values between 0 and 1, and it may change outcomes quite a bit, but if it doesn't change the rank order of preference of the various policies, management regimes that you're thinking about, then, yes, it'd be nice to know, but it's really not necessary. If, however, you discover that there's some critical value, by the time you get to the region to 0.5 or 0.7, all of a sudden it changes your rank order of preference. That increases the priority for devoting more analytical and research resources to trying and gather those data. It helps solve the problem of priority, where all data would be useful, all data would be valuable, but now we know precisely which data we should target in order to inform the decision. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I think this is exactly the issue. Is actually we're discussing, for instance, this notion of essential variables, and I think this started with the climate. What are the essential variables that we really need to know? Well, here is not for decision making, but is to know, about and predict our weather. But for biodiversity, try to do the same. And really, I guess it depends on the question you want to answer, what is essential to know. But, if you have monitoring programs, and you need to have, you need to decide what kind of data is essential, and essential, of course, primarily for decisions, because other things we may find out later, but for decisions for sustainability and so decisions so we have biodiversity in the future. So these are the essential, so exactly is right. I mean, those that affect decisions, that these are the ones that we should prioritize. But knowing which ones are those, well, maybe with your method, I never looked at this way, but maybe this is a way really to try to prioritize what we should invest in when we're looking for data. Susa, you put your hands.
Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting to listen to all of you. So I'm really happy for having been here. I think I got a lot of new ideas for the risk assessment work that we are doing, so that's great. Regarding the specific issue of the data and where it would be needed most, and also responding a bit to the previous speaker on this issue, is that how we have looked at it now with the risk assessment that we do within the Mission Atlantic, is that we have this risk assessment and the top risks. We know the sectors, the drivers, and the ecosystem components that the stakeholders and the experts currently prioritize. And this is not so related to the data availability, at least not directly. So what we have actually planned to do next is that we take a look at the low risk cases where we think there's a low risk indicated, but where there is very little data support. So that we see a bit risky. So it's something that if we focus on looking for more data for that, it could be that these actually low risk areas could become more important for the analysis, because there's big uncertainty, we don't know. So it could be just, it's a perception. And the other way is also having the high risk components where we don't have data. So that's obvious one sector where we would need more data. And this is something that I think it's been super great. I mentioned earlier that I have these PhD students from Mission Atlantic visiting me, and this has really provided us a really good chance to discuss topics like this. So in that sense, it's been great. And the other things we've been discussing is this indicator issue, and particularly indicators, quantitative indicators when it has to do with ecosystem services and their state. So there we are having trouble, and also there we would need to focus on those indicators that the stakeholders identify as, or existing services, the stakeholders identify as highly important to them and being as high risk or vulnerable items. So that's what we are doing currently. And emerging sectors, Rodrigo mentioned that. That's something that we have also identified that would be important. And also, if you think of this blue acceleration, I think this is something that we need to address. And one thing maybe I can share of the results that we got, it's always the fisheries that come up. So whatever we do in whichever risk assessment, whichever area, it's always the fisheries. And we've had quite a bit of discussions here if this is actually a data bias. We have a lot of people who work with fisheries. There's a lot of data from fisheries. We don't have that kind of data from the different sectors. And is this really the reality, or is it more kind of driven by the available data that we have? And that's something that I think we need to also address within the Mission Atlantic project also quite carefully, because we still aim to look at this broad range of different sectors and their pressures together and combined. So I think that's something we need to look into. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Actually, this is very interesting because, again, bringing the biodiversity here, we still see from all the reports that fisheries is really the main driver for biodiversity loss still today, even with all the other factors. But maybe because I mean, with the kind of data we have, do you think it could be because of that we still find this interaction to be the strongest? Yeah, this could be also why maybe we don't have data on other pressures. We don't have as much data. Perhaps this could be also a reason. But I now pass the word to Rodrigo. That is Rodrigo. Yes.
Thanks so much, Isabel. That discussion is very interesting. As Steven said, the data is expensive, especially marine data. It's more expensive than the average. And studying the MSP process in some countries, it is very interesting because some countries started with 2,000 descriptors or layers to try to gather in the database, and they started to be crazy because started well, but as soon as they started to gather this data, to deal with the data and to pay for this data, it was impossible to deal. And most of these countries started to decrease, and now they work with less than 10% of these 2,000 descriptors. And that's what we are doing here in Brazil. We started to study all these countries that are more developed in terms of MSP. And we are starting with the most important data that they consider, the Blue Amazon. So we look for our activities, we look for our priorities, and we are trying to have something more simple or something more direct. And we are using around only 50 descriptors. And I try to do this with these main points. So for the first version of the MSP in Brazil, we are going to use about 50. And for the next versions, it will depend on the results. On the first, we can increase or decrease depending on the results. But that's the way that we are dealing with this, basically due to the costs in terms of time and in terms of money itself. So thank you.
Mary, I think you're next.
Yeah, so it's interesting because now, coming back to this and hearing about fisheries, and it makes me think. Okay, now let's think about your question, Isabel, and what do you want this data for? Do I want these data for the mesopelagic? Then I would say, even though ours is a fisheries, project, or looking at the potential for sustainable fisheries in the mesopelagic, I think that, given what we're learning so far, even I'm much more concerned about mining. I'm more concerned about deep sea mining, because that's the ecosystems that everyone else has been discussing today. Well, Susa and Rodrigo, they're not talking about the mesopelagic, and that's well, actually, there's very little protection for the mesopelagic. These midwater ecosystems or communities, they enjoy very little protection. The International Seabed Authority is focused on the seafloor, and for example, and the rest of the protection is higher up in the water column. And so there's so it's deep sea mining and what that means. But then again, also I go back to what my original interest was: is where is it going to be? Where's the deep sea mining going to be? Where are the interests? What are the options for potentially managing or governing that particular human activity? I think that's a much more that question would have a lot more potentially influence on what could happen in the mesopelagic than filling in any gaps in knowledge about some of the ecological processes that are happening there first. And so that could help us to narrow down. I'm not to say that we don't need the science, or of course we do. We need the natural science in place and to understand what's happening. But still knowing what's going on in these other sectors it's an important piece of the puzzle. So, and what the trajectories are. Yeah.
So you want to reply to this, Rodrigo? You put your
Yes, sorry. Yes, thank you so much. Based on what Mary said about this deep mining, it's a very worry. And it's very interesting because nowadays we are moving for the electric cars, for example, and they use a huge amount of minerals. And if you calculate until 2030, the amount of cars that are changing, and we are going to have a great demand of these minerals. And there's a great amount of these minerals that we don't have enough in the territories. So we're going to look for these minerals in the sea. So the deep mine tends to increase due to this change of the hydrocarbons to the electric cars. So that's something that we are very worried about, because we're moving in for the cars, but it's going to demand more minerals, and most of them are in the deep sea areas. Thanks.
Well, but going back to this deep sea question, so you think that this would be the knowledge that is needed is where this mining is going to occur, but what kind of information would you need from this? Where and how? What is the technology? What are the effects that this mining will have in the water column? And so what kind of information would you need?
Well, again, yeah, I would say yes. All of those things that you suggested, could we use it? Yes, they are important. Again, it will depend on what specific question we're going to address about the mining, which places may be potentially vulnerable. Then we want to ask the industry what where they're going to expand their activities. What are they going to be mining for? And how at what kind of time scale are we talking about? When would they be ready to move in? Are there and then also what kind of regulations are in place. You know, we have the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction agreement being negotiated, and so what does that mean for the future of mining? Perhaps that, you know, closes things off. That's what I would. Those are the things I would like to. Those are the things I would like to know there. But then ecologically, of course, yeah. What, you know, how vulnerable are these different? How vulnerable is the biodiversity or the particular species? I mean, like I'm thinking the bristlemouths, right? It's the most abundant vertebrate on the planet. You can the abundance can be measured with a number that has 18 zeros after it. I can't remember what it is, a quadrillion or so. It's you know, they're very small, and I mean I'd be very concerned about a bristlemouth you know, vulnerability. You know, what are they? Do we know what that is? You know, how can we avoid a bristlemouth apocalypse, please? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrizio. You wanted to?
Yeah, I was thinking about this data collection element and maybe the optimization of the data collections in light of what the objective is. And I was thinking in terms of this uncertainty, okay, in terms of the state, like for example, the ecosystem state, I mean, where is the ecosystem and how much of the pressures and different hazards can actually resist to before it changes in a different state. And maybe we also have uncertainty in terms of the interactions within the ecosystem. And that one, I can see some level of optimizing the data collection just to respond to specific things. Okay, how much the prey is eating this predator, and where are the prey and predator distributed around. But I think we also have to consider the uncertainty in terms of the models that we use to make some of these predictions and some of these decisions. And in that case, it becomes much more difficult to understand where to stop in the data collection. I mean, one example here, Rodrigo mentioned that, okay, the objective was to reduce CO2. We moved from carbon-based transport to electric-based transport. Now we have a problem because we need the minerals somewhere else. And that's putting more pressures in the system that we wanted to relieve from pressures. So I'm wondering, of course, there is a cycle in this decision-making process, I suppose. But how often this cycle has to spin before actually we agree on a decision, and how much we have to revisit that decision. And I don't know if there are experiences around this working group, maybe also from other sectors, maybe in transport or energy. I mean, if that's the case, and how much there is willingness of the different stakeholders to rediscuss decisions once they are taken.
Mary, you want to answer this question from? Well,
I'd like to return with another question, and that's that because, you know, these things are cyclical, like you say, Patrizio. Ideally, you know, we have these loops and where we have interactions with the decision, you know, the analysts and the decision makers, and so on. The science and the decision makers will loop around, and we also have these, you know, participatory, you know, policies as well, and you know, they take time. And then also when we have a lot of stakeholders, I'm thinking about, you know, Rodrigo and all the stakeholders in, you know, he has to interact with the Marine Spatial Plan or Sousa's ODEM model, where you showed the interaction of all these sectors and pressures and on the different ecosystem components. If all of these, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, a lot of this is going to require a sort of, you know, participatory governance as well, in order to address the questions that we have about, you know, how will the Anthropocene proceed, right? And that's going to take a long time with the participatory governance. And so I wish that Garrett, was that his name, was still here. I'd be interested to hear his answer to the question. But you know, how can we, with, you know, with these wicked problems and so many stakeholders need to agree, they need to discuss. We need this participatory governance, and not all parts of the world are ready for that. So how there's sort of a mismatch in time as well, in the time we need to take decisions in order to achieve some kind of sustainable management of our resources. We see we're running out of time with the IPCC report and the biodiversity crisis. We're running out of time, and do we have? So those are also uncertainties too.
Well, but and this is a question for all of you. Do you think these are kind of questions that the scientific community could help with? And this is, of course, not the natural sciences. This is more the social science community could really help, because we know that there are this mismatch, and even the more simpler science policy interface, even if it's sectorial, which is now difficult because we know that everything is connected with everything. But even sectorial, this interaction between science and policy makers and managers, we see that this timing and this time scales are very different, and the policymakers need things for today. We need time to assess what knowledge exists and all these things, but how to decrease the time that is needed for this participatory approach. I think this is something that I don't know if Stephen, if you have some thought about this, because I'm sure this is something that is not new for this interaction between the science and policy and the stakeholder.
No, indeed not, Isabel, and it certainly is the heart of the issue in many cases. There are a number of ways to approach this. There are situations. So this now gets into methodology a little bit. Let us say that there are 7, 10, 12, sort of major actions that could be taken, and that you could combine these into different strategies. Some of those strategies would use all of these actions, some would only use one, some of them would change the sequencing, and so on and so forth. We have no idea which are the best, but what we can do is, if you set up one of these systems, just like you would search in the uncertainty space, you can search in the policy space. So you could set up an experimental design where, 10,000 different combinations of these different actions are included in a policy, and then you see how they do across, a range of plausible futures. And what you can often find in something like that is sort of a triage. There may be some of those actions that show up in 90% of the policy packages that were judged to have been successful according to a number of criteria, according to the multi-attribute assessment. There are some that may rarely show up, but turned out to be crucial under extreme conditions. And you can actually utilize various data mining techniques to lay out a pathway. So what you can do is come to a consensus on what are the first things that we're going to do that really seem to be essential, kind of no matter what. And so that can be the first package of recommendations. Of these 12 things, do these 3 to begin with. Some of the others may be too expensive, they may not be needed, and so on and so forth. Then secondly, you can actually set out kind of a decision tree where you are looking at particular values. This goes back to the question of data. What data do you need? Looking at particular indicators of how the system is evolving, how well the management is meeting, the management regime, it's meeting its goals and so on. And that can then trigger, depending on what you see, a second group of actions that you would take. So it's possible to, in very, very simplistic terms, look and define a set of things that you would seem to do in the short term because they show up no matter what. Then define trigger points for considering other actions, and then depending on how far you're looking into the future, if you're looking out to 2050 or something, what then would be the things that would be triggered depending on how the system evolves and what data you're able to get. So it is possible to develop policy priorities in the same way that you can generate data priorities. And actually, in spite of the fact that the system is still very unknown, people have different views, different interests, still nonetheless get consensus on, okay, but this is what we should do right now.
So if I ask you for this question we were discussing here on deep sea mining, so probably we'll do it. So this is a first assumption, we'll do it. But how do you think that and some countries really are in a rush. They really want to start as soon as possible. So with the little we know about the consequences, how could you apply this this methodology really to start acting soon? How would you analyze the options?
I have a sort of a phrase that I use, which is, in the world of deep uncertainty, anything worth doing is worth doing superficially. And but what I mean by that is I would, do something really simplistic, like, put together, a 7-equation model in an Excel spreadsheet and really begin to explore what really makes a difference. Where are the important decision times, decision regions, and so on and so forth? What needs to be, developed further? The truth is, Isabel, I think there are a number of projects here. I mean, one is the analytical project, the sort of the decision support, what people like me do. Another project is, to have, what I alluded to in my recommendations, kind of a structured conversation about what really is a vision for a successful outcome. Engaging all the various parties involved, and I would sort of work both of those, simultaneously, with a view of, kind of coming together in the middle, where you are then able to have some kind of a decision support structure that can help inform these deliberations, and at the same time, gain greater coherence on what we collectively you know, the countries that border the Atlantic, and other countries, you know, such as China or India, actually, you know, hope to achieve. Now, there's, you know, you also need to start talking about things like enforcement mechanisms and so on, but those can be part of both of these projects, the ones starting from the end and working backwards, the ones starting from the beginning and looking forwards, namely the policy visioning project and the analytical support project.
Well, thank you. We have here a question. Actually, you have two questions. One that came now that says, so do we have the ecological and biological data to enable us to make an assessment of vulnerability of the deep sea taxa? I don't know, Susa, if you look at this, or who wants, Mary wants to reply to this one.
Vulnerability to what?
I don't know. This is
so, but that's
yeah.
That's
the hard part. Yeah, but I agree though. I mean, it's very you know, very difficult. I mean, it depends on which parts of the deep sea and from which kinds of taxa. There are people here who are in the audience who have more experience with deep sea ecology than I do. And so, I mean, do we have this? Do we have this? I mean, it's full of uncertainties still. And so, that's definitely true. But anyone else? So yeah.
If Carrie's still there, actually, because she's
Carrie's here. Hello, Carrie. I see your picture.
Carrie, you can now ask your question live, and also if you want to
answer as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry, it was when you guys were talking about you know, maybe not necessarily needing so much of the natural sciences, but then in the same time talking about assessing vulnerability of species to I think it was in the context of mining. And
I don't think anyone said that we don't need the natural science. I think that we were saying that we need the natural science and we need the other information too. So we need to draw upon both these things. And so we get the natural science in this forum tends to receive quite a lot of well, the audience probably, if I would guess, is probably dominated by natural scientists. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's more to say welcome to the other kinds of information that we need, because it's the Anthropocene. We are the dominant, you know, we are a driving force on this planet, and so we need to know what's happening and our interests are spreading into places they far from where they've been before. But please carry on.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about the you know, the biodiversity assessments, and it's just so challenging to make any kind of assessments when it comes to deep sea, as I'm sure you know, Mary, as well. That there comes a point when there's so little data on the ecology and the biology that it's a real challenge. So yeah, but I take your point. You know, it is important that we use what we have, and it is important that we think about those other sources of data, because we have to make decisions now. And as many people have pointed out, it's hugely time consuming to collect those kinds of data. But it was more thinking of Isabel's point of, you know, what can we do as scientists? What can we look to do? What are the things we can do to help? And I guess it's one of the things we can do to help.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Carrie. Exactly. I mean, I don't think in this panel we have too many natural scientists. Actually, we are not talking almost about natural science data but I think it's good to point out that we still need it. You know, it's because, of course, I mean, there is no problem in deep sea mining if we don't worry about the species that are in the ocean. Then, well, maybe still some practices may cause some problems in attain release and but mostly we are worried about deep sea mining because of the species that live at the ocean and not because of other reasons. So I think we still need to know what is out there and you know, and to know if we can do some the impacts. I mean, we need to know exactly what are the effects. And of course, I don't know how much this will really have an impact on the decisions about deep sea mining. This is another thing. Maybe the people that make these decisions, they don't really are very, you know, they don't care so much about what the effects on deep sea biodiversity. But of course, as ourselves as a community are concerned with this, this is a factor that we need to put forward. Susa, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just quickly. So I'm very much of an ecologist, so I come totally from that side. But so there's nothing more I would like more than long indicator pressure time series. So if I got to choose many of those, please. But I was also very surprised actually when it comes to this data and ecological data, and that's where a lot of focus has been. But when we look at our 7 case studies, we actually have quite a bit of data shortage. So we are gonna have to run with very qualitative assessments for a few of them. And that surprised me a lot, coming from the Baltic Sea myself, and which is kind of data rich area. I was really surprised how much we need to accommodate for this data shortage actually. So so that was just a quick comment.
No, but that's why we were trying to hear from you what kind of data and knowledge we need. You know, of course we heard about all this modeling and all about these models of decision making, and that of course probably we can still work on those, and also the scientific community to work on those. But I think we still need to say that we need some data that are collected with you know, all this new technology, ocean observation and all this. As Rodrigo also mentioned, you know, the physical data and all these things, we still need to have that. But the point I think we are making a bit maybe too strongly is that well, that alone is not going to be the solution for our problems here, and that's really, there are different ways to select also what are the critical information and knowledge that we need and what is more urgent. I don't know. Is there any? Oh, there was a question that you did not answer. I think Mary, related to your talk that you had here. If there was a spatial where is this? A spatial
I think it was a spatial component in your system dynamic
yes.
approach.
Okay. Yes, actually there is, and so we do have spatially explicit data information in the project. We have, and we're trying to look at ways that we can bring this in. I mean, I talked about the approach that we have with the spatial, or sorry, the system dynamic models right now, and those we've not tried to do those in a spatially explicit way yet. And of course, if sufficient information comes along and it's possible to do that, then and to parameterize it as such, then we could do it. It would be computationally very demanding. We are also with the spatial data and dynamical data that comes from the project. then we are going to, look at things like look at the social cost of carbon, look at maps of these, look at also the with the biophysical models that we have. Try to look at these in relation to what the decisions look like in geographical space too, because we have different kinds of strategies or decisions that can be taken in different places. And so what does that mean for the mesopelagic? And so we are doing that. And it's, again, this is something that will take, we have many, many years of questions that we can address here. But yes, we do have, through the MESO project, we have a spatially explicit biophysical data as well, models. Yes?
Well, thank you very much, Mary, and thank you, everyone. I think our time is being exhausted, I think, and I'll just.
Oh, and I'm a natural scientist too.
Okay. Well, no. And I'll just ask Patrizio now to some concluding remarks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a very inspiring afternoon or morning or evening, depending where you are. And I think we learned a lot also in terms of methods and this kind of exploring the space of uncertainty within the frameworks that we have. I think the marine sector and the ocean sector and the blue economy, they offer actually a lot of opportunity to test this framework of decision-making under deep uncertainty, which I would expand maybe in making critical decisions under deep uncertainty, in the sense that the decisions that we make in the ocean are actually relevant for a series of global challenges. And so they are critical decisions in that sense. And we have seen how this can be translated into fish stock assessment and advice on fish stocks and spatial planning and how to design protected areas. We didn't talk about that, but that's definitely also a relevant area of application. And I think, I mean, we have enough material to start brainstorming, collect some of these recommendations and advices, and maybe put them down in a paper that we can hand over, in this case, the decision maker about research fundings. And try to maybe push this research agenda through the different level of decision making for the All Atlantic Research Alliance. So that basically said, it means that we'll maybe contact all the panelists here to get a short statement about what we can introduce into this policy brief, and we will issue it before the meeting in Washington. And yeah. Apart from that, I have just to thank you all for very inspiring talks, and also the audience for very inspiring questions. And good afternoon, or good evening, or morning.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.